Overwatch 2, the sequel to the popular hero shooter, promised to be a more polished and refined experience, with new heroes, maps, and game modes. However, the game's reception was mixed, and it quickly began to lose players and go down in hype. There were a number of reasons for Overwatch 2's failure. First, the game was released in a very bare-bones state. There was only one new game mode, and the new heroes and maps were few and far between. This left many players feeling like they were not getting their money or even their time's worth. The original Overwatch was released with a much more robust offering of content. There were 6 new heroes, 12 new maps, and 3 new game modes. This gave players a lot to explore and experiment with, and it helped to keep the game fresh for an extremely long time. In contrast, Overwatch 2 felt like it was missing a lot of the content at launch. There was only one new game mode, and the new hero and maps were few and far between. This made the game feel very repetitive and stale, and it quickly lost players' interest. Second, we have the game's monetization system, as it was seen as being far too greedy. Players were being nickel and dimed for every single item you can think of, whether it was a skin, the battle pass, which turned off many players who felt like they were being taken advantage of. The original Overwatch had a much more generous monetization system. Players could earn loot boxes by playing the game, and then they could have also purchased some if they chose to. This made it very possible for players to get the items they wanted without spending a lot of money. In contrast though, Overwatch 2 monetization system was much more restrictive. Players only had the option to purchase skins with real money unless if there was some special offerings that some were free. This made it very difficult for players to get the items they wanted, really without spending a lot of money. Third, the game's competitive scene was a mess. The developers made a number of changes to the game's balance, which threw the competitive meta into chaos. This made it difficult for players to keep up, and it led to a lot of frustration. The original Overwatch had a very stable competitive scene. The developers made a few changes to the game's balance, which allowed the meta to develop naturally. This made it possible for players to find a playstyle that suited them, and it helped them to keep the game competitive. In contrast, Overwatch 2 competitive scene was constantly changing. The developers made frequent changes to the game's balance, which threw the meta into chaos. This made it difficult for players to keep up and led to a lot of frustration. Finally, the overall design of Overwatch 2 was seen as being too similar to the original Overwatch. There was not enough new features or changes to make the game feel fresh. The original Overwatch was a great game, but it was not perfect. There were a number of things that could have been improved, like the lack of tutorial mode and the poor matchmaking system. However, the game still had many positives compared to the second version. One of the most hyped up features for Overwatch 2 was PvE, and that so far has been an absolute disaster. In the end, Overwatch 2 was a complete disappointment. It failed to live up to the hype, and it quickly died after its release. The developers have promised to improve the game over time, but it remains to be seen if they'll be able to turn things around. Make sure you leave a like on this video and let me know what are your thoughts on Overwatch 2. How do you think that they can improve the game?